Yeah, it's fantastic to be here at Node Holiday. Is that what we're calling this? Or National Lampoon's Node Vacation? Or what are we? Okay. So, foundations of Node.js. It's easy sometimes while you're working on a piece of software that you can forget what it is you're actually working on and how you've gotten here. You can be focused on a particular bug and be trying to solve this particular symptom, but you're missing the bigger picture and therefore the right solution to your problem. For instance, in the asynchronous nature of Node, it's really tempting to add a set immediate or a next tick and then fix your immediate problem and then cause a world of havoc for everyone else. The seemingly innocuous change to a single line of code has changed the order of events, and everyone who's been relying on the previous implicit order is now broken. These are the kinds of bugs we hit all the time in Node. And while you're working on these problems, it's important to zoom out and get a macro view and make sure you've not lost the vision and the important problems you're trying to solve. Just to give you a little bit of background on who I am, I'm TJ Fontaine. I'm an engineer at Joyent and the project lead of Node.js. For about 14 years, I was a systems administrator, and I was also doing software development on contract. I had to support all kinds of ridiculous applications on platforms like Windows and Linux, as well as AIX and HPUX, and I've got to tell you, it's a lot of fun trying to support people on HPUX 10.2 with Perl version 4. If you've not done it, it's fantastic. But my passion was in open source projects. So when I had the opportunity to come to Joyent and work full-time on open source, I don't see how I could pass it up. But it wasn't just any open source project, it was Node.js, and I got to leave all of my Python twisted chains right behind me. Yeah, what we have with Node, though, as you're all very well aware, is a perfect framework, the right language at the right time. People were doing C and C++ CGI applications. People still are doing Perl and PHP server-side applications. And then there are people who are enjoying their Java and .NET. But we have the right language, we have the right framework at the right time for developing in our current world and environment. JavaScript is not only empowering the front end, it's empowering the back end. People are sharing their assets between the front end and the back end, their engineering resources between front end and back end, and it's moving into embedded environments where dynamic languages and frameworks were shunned before. Node, based on JavaScript, a language that's mostly standardized, that gets to be pushed forward by companies and other motivated people who go to some of the most exciting meetings on the planet, I'm sure, are what defines this language. But because we don't have to pick our language, we don't have to pick our virtual machine, we can focus on creating the software that succinctly solves your problems today. So there are example frameworks that everybody can use that you can look to for guidance, and there are many people who will pick new languages and frameworks going forward. But what we have here is the right thing. It runs on Windows, but it's clearly an interface that's designed from Unix and POSIX APIs. And everybody here has heard the Unix motto of do one thing and do one thing well. And that also, I believe, is tattooed on Substack's back. But that core concept, that ethos of do one thing well, is what makes Node Node. And it expands out into our module ecosystem. But it's not just about our operating system. It's not about the fact that we're as close to write once, run everywhere, that we beat Java in that aspect. It's not about that. It's not about just being able to work on Windows and Linux. It's the fact that all of those operating systems identified that scalable, non-blocking I/O was a problem for everybody. And that's why you came to Node.js. Open source or proprietary, micro or monolithic, Emacs or Vim, tabs or spaces, regardless of the religious nature, those operating systems solved for non-blocking I/O. Sometimes in wildly different ways, sometimes in the exact way, sometimes through competition. Maybe it was capitalism that drove them there, maybe it was open source. They solved for non-blocking I/O. Each operating system solved the need for its end user for that specific issue. And that's what Node needs to be doing. That is what Node does. It applies that decision-making process for when it designs APIs for its users. It's not about what other frameworks do. It's not about it's about understanding what your use cases actually are and creating a solution that will work for that. So you have to figure out what goes in core. How do we decide what goes in core and what doesn't go in core? The first question is about what are you trying to do? It's not just enough for us to work full-time on Node and give you JavaScript bindings for libc or the kernel. You're not going to be able to get very far. If we picked the front-end language for web browsers and didn't actually give you an HTTP interface, you'd probably think that we were crazy. But our design interface is around network solutions or non-blocking I/O. We want to provide useful APIs that can get you working in those environments as quickly as possible. The balance has to be about what can be included in core and what can be done external, but what also can we get right for everyone else. You could go and use the net module and write a pure JavaScript implementation of HTTP, and please, somebody do that. But Node would still provide a default implementation because it's hard to get those semantics right and be efficient all at the same time. So creating APIs that are net new is not the only part of Node. Though we're going to do new APIs, those are still going to happen, but it's also about identifying what's working and what's not. So I can work full-time on Node, Fedora can work full-time on Node, and we can work on the things that interest us, but we can get lost building a framework for the framework's sake and work on adding features that we think are interesting. But feedback from you guys is exactly where we need to be so that we can make sure we're adding things that are important for you and fixing things that need to be for you. For instance, if what everybody wanted to do for sandbox JavaScript was actually contextify and not the VM module that was included in Node, what good is the VM module that's included in Node? So we need to make sure that we're quickly reacting to those things, but providing a useful transition for that mechanism. So we have this vibrant ecosystem from the modules, from the community. We have our contribution pattern of forking us on GitHub and making, all of these things make Node exciting to develop for. These are not new ideas for software, for open source, for Node itself. They're not unique to us. They're a core piece of what has made Node.js successful, and they're integral to continue to take it going forward. The pluggable nature of our APIs and the natural ability for people to play with new features in their own branches and for those things to grow and exist external and then be brought in when they've been proven out in the broader ecosystem is what makes Node a fantastic environment to work in. That's the foundation of Node.js, a small core designed around the idea of solving for common problems that everyone's having. That foundation isn't changing. In fact, it's a fantastic inflection point. We're seeing a ton of adoption from enterprises, large companies, and people are leaving their Java encampments to come and quickly iterate and have fun on this Node project that we're all here to play with. But that influx of new users requires new changes within ourselves. When Node started as a scrappy insurgent framework, it's cut its teeth with early adopters and people who are with us and aren't with us anymore. It has different requirements, and Node needs to not just be iterating as fast as you're iterating, but serving the needs of the users. We've got things that we're growing up, and our expectations now are different about what we should actually be delivering for people. We need to be clear about what we're delivering on our roadmap. We need to make sure that those things that are on the roadmap are things that you're asking for and that you are in need of. What we know from when I've been doing all these Node on the Road events, while people want to know what's coming in the next version of Node, once they've deployed on a version of Node, they're reticent to change, even from a patch level. So we've had historically rocky upgrade processes. We need to make sure that those processes are actually working going forward, and not just for the next immediate minor or major, but actually for as many as we can see going forward. We have to provide compelling reasons for people to upgrade, but without breaking all of the work that they have already done. Those are the things that we need to make sure that we understand. Our commitment to stability is crucial and critical to the success of this foundation, of this platform that we're working on. And that's not just about an API. It's really easy to say we're API compatible, but for Node, it's much more about the events and the underlying behavior in the system. You know, as I mentioned at the start, it's easy to just add a next tick or a set immediate, and this problem right here is gone. But then all of a sudden, everybody else has ever tried to understand the semantics of end, finish, and close in their Node app can understand it's not just about getting that part right. That's not to say that once we have an API or a behavior, we can't change it. That's not set in stone. It's about making sure that we understand if we're going to change that API, if we're going to change that behavior, that we communicate with you directly so that you can know on your future versions of Node how you're going to be deploying against that. That future that Node is building for its roadmap is actually your future because you have asked for it. We need to understand and reflect on the consequences of our changes, not only within Node itself, but the impact to our ecosystem as a whole. And maybe this all seemed obvious. Maybe all of these things are things everybody here already knew. But it's important that we always remember what it is that we're trying to solve for. What is it that Node was trying to solve for? We're busy working and executing on the day-to-day. We're busy fixing our bugs, and we're busy landing our pull requests. We can't lose sight of our overall goals. We must continually recognize our core ethos, our desire to create great things, create great software, create great communities. Thank you, everybody here, for creating those things. Thank you for coming to these events, for having these events, and thank you for making Node.js. I can't express how thankful I am that all of you here are participating and excited about Node.js and coming however many thousands of miles you came to Node Holiday to actually participate with all of this. Thank you.